And so with that, I am delighted to welcome you to our Creating Accessible Emails presented by Results One. This is a series of webinars we've had that have been amazing. And so it's great pleasure that I'm going to introduce you Kim Alfonso. And Kim, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, as was mentioned, my name is Kim Greenfield Alfonso, and I want to first welcome all of you that have participated previously in the series, and for the newbies, I welcome you as well. So again, I'm the CEO of Results One LLC. I go by she, her, hers. I'm an African-American female, and today I'm wearing a green and white top and black eyeglasses. Results One works with organizations that are embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility through providing diversity, equity, and inclusion training, disability inclusion consulting and training, employee development training, which includes executive coaching, strategic planning, mediation services, and what we're here today, digital accessibility testing and training to ensure that all digital content is accessible to everyone, including people with disabilities. I also have with me today, and she'll introduce herself in a second, but Citlali Rioja, who is a certified accessibility tester, and she will be doing the bulk of the training today. So let's get started. First, I want to define digital accessibility for some of you that may be new. Digital accessibility refers to the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites, digital content and tools such as social media platforms, PDFs, documents, and what we're here to talk about today, emails, and technologies such as video, audio, animations, kiosks, and mobile apps by people with disabilities. Put simply, accessibility is the idea that the digital content should be usable by all people, no matter where they're located, no matter what device they're using, whether it's a screen reader, a screen magnification device, or their ability. Email accessibility is the practice of ensuring that your emails that you send out to your customers, to your clients, to your families, to your friends can be read and understood by anyone, including people with disabilities. So why is it so important? Well, I know most of you know that with the onslaught of COVID, that we really turned into a virtual world very quickly overnight. And what happened is a lot of people found that a lot of the content, whether it was email content, websites, was not accessible to people with disabilities. And so that's why we're here today. But why is it really important? First of all, we know that an accessible design will improve usability by everyone. So not only the person with the disability, but for everyone who is using it. We also know that email accessibility helps you reach more people. You're not going to miss or exclude an audience. And we'll talk a little bit later on that size of that audience that you potentially are missing and you're not reaching. It also improves engagement and retention, meaning that someone that comes and you're sending an email and they can read it, then they're going to read the rest of the emails that you send out, whether you're selling a product, a service, whatever it is that email is being sent for, and they'll stay with you. We also know that it's going to minimize your legal risk. We know lawsuits are up 200%, and they're hitting everyone, small business, nonprofits, hospitalities, you name it, they're hitting it. And we know that if you get hit with a lawsuit, you're starting at about a $25,000 K, as well as paying the cost to have your, whether it's emails, whether it's websites, fixed. We also know that it will separate you from competitors, meaning the competitors that some of you may be competing against, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're for-profit, whether you're working for a large business. It can separate you because it gives a different feel about who you are if people can access your content. And thereby, it will enhance your brand and your reputation in the community. So bottom line is, the reason is simple. If people have trouble viewing, reading, clicking on something that you might put in that email, or understanding your email, then they're not going to take the actions that you expect. They're not going to take the actions that you would like for them to take. So again, as I mentioned earlier, just some statistics that you need to know. We know there's over 1 billion people who live with some form of disability, and they represent 13 trillion in disposable income. In the United States, 27% of the population, over 91 million people, live with a disability, and that is our largest population, minority population. Finally, we also know that 79, almost 80% of people with disabilities rely on screen readers. So they're relying on their screen reader to read the information that you're putting in to your email. And just a legal reminder for those of you that have not seen this slide before, it is the law. So under Title II and Title III, Title II refers to state, local government. Title III refers to public accommodations, so your commercial entities, prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities by businesses that are open to the public, and they consider those public accommodations. Title III of the ADA requires that every owner, lessor, or operator of a place of public accommodation provide equal access to users who meet the ADA standards for disability. And finally, websites are considered as places of accommodation. And by extension, emails also fall under Title II of the ADA, especially when they might be including things that you're offering to the public, such as discounts, pre-sale opportunities, or any other perks that may not be available elsewhere. And finally, it is the basis for lawsuits for failing to provide accessible experience to everyone that can access your content, or to everyone you're sending that information out to. So now I'm going to turn it over and let Citlali introduce you, and we're going to jump right in. Is email accessibility that different? So Citlali.
Thanks, Kim. Hello, everyone. As Kim mentioned, my name is Citlali Rioja. I am an accessibility tester. I am also visually impaired. I'm going to go through some of the first steps, and if you are familiar with our previous series, some are going to sound familiar. So, is email accessibility that different? Kind of. Email accessibility has some of the same principles, so that would be color and contrast, alt text, etc. But it also has some unique elements. So there are limitations, such as image blocks, some visual displays that only show plain text, some formatting, and some interactive content. There are attachments. So beyond the email message body itself, you have to take into account any attachments. So any PDFs, any Word documents, anything that you attach, which they also need to be accessible on their own. Each email platform has its own accessibility checker and accessibility features. So if you use Gmail or if you use Outlook, things might change. A user can prefer to receive email content, accessible email content. So this is a checkbox that will alert anyone that is sending said user an email that their email is not accessible, which is a feature mostly found in Outlook. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the email formats. Emails can be composed in 3 different formats. So HTML, plain text, and rich text. Next slide, please. For HTML, HTML allows all stylistic options, so bold text, italics, etc., and all type of images to be read. So it still has to make sense, and it should still make sense without any images or without any type of placement, without any type of the accessories for the text, but it can have all these options. So this is the best format for accessibility. It is a default mode for most email platforms. Next slide, please. You can get to rich text. Rich text formatting is less accessible than HTML. It does not have the full support for what is headings and list structures. So it will appear as text, but it won't be read correctly. You can format text, so you can put bullets, you can align text, and you can use other options, including adding links to objects. However, not so accessible. Next slide, please. When talking about plain text, this format works for mostly for all email programs, but it doesn't support bold or italic text. Any type of color fonts will not be shown, and any other text formatting will not work. The plain text format does not support showing pictures at all inside the message, although pictures can be included as attachments. It is just the text. Next slide, please. So, color and contrast. The rules are the same for everything, for documents, for any type of web content, and that includes email content. So the rules are as such: 4.521 for all text, images of text, any type of image or anything else. And 321 for large text. Large text begins from 18 points or up. This means that any type of blue-green or red-green color blindness will be taken into account. You can also just use a grace color, but this still needs to be part of color and contrast rules. So if your background is too light and your text in the foreground is too light and cannot be read, then it's not accessible. That still needs to be tested. Next slide, please. So, use of color. You need to try to avoid using color to send a message on its own. A bright red warning or a bright red sale sign will not be noticed. It won't be really read the same for screen readers. A screen reader cannot let someone know that the color of this text is red, or the color of this text is such and such, or the size of this text is large. It does need to be either pre-programmed to do that, or the colors are just ignored. You need to be able to inform the user of anything that you want without the text color being taken into account in case they're using a plain text format. So make sure that information you want to convey does not depend only on colors. Next slide, please. We're going into font type. So a minimum font type is a 14 points font size. We recommend using a sans serif font family. This means a simple lines, very easy to read. A good test for the type of font that you want to use would be if to type a number 1, a capital I, and a lowercase l. If you can tell the difference between all of them, you're on the right track. Now, most fonts that is accessible and the most common fonts. You can use Helvetica, you can use Verdana, you can use Times, you can use Century Gothic, Tahoma, or Courier. These are the most common. Most of your emails will have options for the family, either Times or anything that has to do with Helvetica, Arial, anything like that can be considered accessible. Next slide, please. We're still talking about font type. We recommend that you avoid using too many different typefaces within one email. So a difference in size delineates importance. A title, a heading level 1, subtitles, anything that's there. It is okay as long as it has the same font type. You want all your titles to have the same font type. We also recommend a maximum of 2 font types in one email. We have an image as an example. It is for a limited time flash sale, and it does get very hard to read. It has at least 4 types of font in the example, and it is visually hard to understand, especially for someone who is dyslexic. It would be terrible. So we understand that you want to call up to attention, you want to call things to attention for users that do have visual capabilities. However, it is always good to keep some things short. Next slide, please. Headings. So headings help determine a visual hierarchy, but they also determine a programmatic hierarchy. So any type of information, a heading can be especially important. So a heading level 1, a main heading, a main title. Headings are like titles and subtitles. Headings that are especially important will be understood by screen readers, and some screen readers users prefer to navigate through headings. So they just skip to the main part or the part that is more important towards them. This is done towards semantic markup, and which means you need to be using a bit of coding for emailing. However, we're going to discuss some of the options you have up next. As our example, we do have a heading level 1, which is a space teddy ink. Oh, thank you, Kim. A heading level 2, which is a navigational menu. Now, this is primarily for a website, or it can be for a document. Your email needs to be marked up. Your email needs to be structured in the same way. So easy to read, easy to understand which part comes next and what comes up. Next slide, please. So H1 should be your main title. It is the subject of your email. Do not skip any number of headings. You can use headings that you have. Oh, Kim, can you please change the slide? Thank you. To use headings, you can have the styling options. So headings can be changed in style within the body of the email. You don't need to copy and paste it from a Word document or anything like that. You can also create your styles or modify any type of styles or input that you have. So if by default it doesn't come in an accessible color, or you want to customize it for it to be for your own organization, perfectly well, as long as you're using accessible colors. It can be pre-programmed, so please test it out before you send it. Next slide, please. Alternative text. Alternative text is a description of an image so that people using screen readers can understand the image in relation to the email content. So it can be auto-generated. Your email platform may generate this itself. It may not. Please do be careful and look it up. But you always need to review the text if it is auto-generated. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's a good description, but sometimes it's just picture of a banner. You need to make sure that images that have text have the description that matches. So if your text says sale on Tuesday, then the alternative text needs to say sale on Tuesday. As a general rule of thumb, avoid using image of, picture of for the actual alt text. It is understood the screen reader will let people know it will read a description, and it's not really necessary. Remember that images that are purely decoration or need to have a null alt text. So it needs to be empty, or they need to be marked as decoration. Avoid image-only emails. Just like font, image-only emails can get lost. A lot of information can be lost. And if it's only an image and your alternative text doesn't have enough information, then the whole email can be thrown out. So it's good to have images, it's good to have calls to action, but always remember to communicate this information in more ways than one. Next slide, please. Visual media. So some email services do not support embedded videos, but links for them can be added to the email. Video should have captions, audio descriptions. You always need to remember to correct the grammar and spelling for the videos, especially if you're doing the captions yourself. Platforms like YouTube will have automated captions. I don't always recommend them because they need to be double checked. So if you have a name like mine, I've never seen an automated service that gets it correctly. And especially if you have an organization, something might be misspelled, names might be misspelled, so you need to double check. It is always a good idea to also provide a transcript that can be understood for Braille keyboards. So if your email just consists of the video or some information and the video link, you might also want to include an attachment with a transcript. So just to make it easier for some of your users or for them to use it while they watch the video. It is always very helpful to give options. Next slide, please. Visual cues. Just like you have to avoid color dependency to communicate, you also have to be very careful with your visual cues. These are emojis, these are shapes, these are icons, any type of logo that you might want to put interlining anything. Assistive technology may not be able to convey what you are trying to communicate, and there will be a break in intentions and understanding. Underlining a text can be confusing since links should be the only text that is underlined. So for example, if you're sending emojis with your email, if it's something for marketing, try to put them at the bottom of the email and try not to use too many. If you were on our social media presentation, you know that assistive technology screen readers will read each emoji individually. So if you have 4 emoji of a smiley face, then smiley face, smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. And that can get very repetitive very fast. Next slide, please. You want to avoid flashing GIFs and images. This is the most important thing. My advice is to just don't use any GIF that flashes, don't use any repetitive images, anything that can cause flashing. So flashing images and GIFs can trigger seizures and migraines amongst other issues. So to avoid that, you want to make sure that you have the proper color and contrast, that nothing flashes more than 3 times per second, and that the color changes aren't too big. So a very strong purple with a very light teal will have a very big change in contrast. And if it flashes, it can trigger a seizure. This will land you in a list for anything that is spam to block to actually getting you a complaint. So you want to be very careful whenever this happens. It's very good. It does call the eye, it does call to action, so it does call attention, but it isn't really worth it. Next slide, please. So the speed of the reproduction of the GIF you sent might not be the same for the users that receive it. And if the GIF loops and has no way to stop, it might cause flashing unintentionally. So be very careful when you're sending something that might flash. It really does depend on the email platform that you are using against the email platform that your client is using. And you're not always sure of that, so it's always better to just be careful. This Join Pro button is has one of the designs that I like the most. It's from a company I like very much. However, I have sent all their emails to spam because I cannot stand looking at their emails without getting a migraine. So even though I want their product, I like what they're offering me, I really rather not. Next slide, please. Zooming in. So this is very important, very, very important due to the variety of devices that an email can be opened in. You should be able to open and zooming into a text by at least 400% without any loss, any distortion, or clipping for the content. So this should be compliant without the use of assistive technology. If you're not familiar, in your phone you have a magnifier in glass. In your phone you have assistive technology that allows you to zoom into text. However, 400% should be a minimum, especially with the variety of devices. You can open it in your desktop, your laptop, it can be on your phone or your tablet device. So this is one of the greatest things. If you have any issues with the numbering, remember 14 is the minimum for any type of text size. Next slide, please. So links. We want to make sure that links are underlined and the color and contrast is at least compliant to a 3:1 ratio. This means that the text color, the link color, is at least 3 times darker than the background. You also have to ensure that the purpose of the link is clear. So that means it's easier to navigate. It means you want to avoid anything that is read more or any generic link text. So click here. You want to give context to what you have. So read more for what? Read more to open our library, read more from our sponsor, or anything like that can actually help if the text is written out. If you have buttons and they're all saying read more, then someone who is navigating just through their links will most likely ignore them because there is no context to where they will lead you. So it's always important to give a bit more information. Next slide, please. This is where things get really complicated. So tables can be confusing to navigate for someone with a screen reader. You have no visual input, or if you do, it might be blurry. The situation might change. There are a lot of variations. So tables are mostly used for layout purposes, and so mark your layout tables for anything that is presentational. So it can be ignored by screen readers. Now, any table that does have information that you want to share with people, that you want it understood, some recommendations are give us a description of it, what the information is on it, before you set up the table on the email without any type of context. So only the table, the TR table row and the TD table data elements should be used, especially for layout tables that must not be used. So you have your caption elements. This is a description for it. You have your summary, which is different. A caption, a description will go row by row and will let the people know it's basically a written form of the table. A summary is just a table that shows our monthly output, basically. So it's a very short one-sentence summary. The TH element, which is the table header element, should still be there. Any type of headers for your table should still exist. You have the scope attribute and the header attributes. So the scope attribute will let you know what is the scope from this table, and the headers will let you know if there's anything else. If it isn't a TH, a table header row, then it's a header. It is a bit confusing, like I mentioned. If you have any problems, we do have basically a translation of a simple table here. But our recommendation is to either simplify the tables, make sure that your description is always visible before the table, It might make your table redundant, but you always want to share information in an equal manner. If you don't have that description and you just send the table out, a lot of people might not understand what you're trying to share. Next slide, please. So attachments. You can attach different types of formats, but remember that any type of document that you have attached must be accessible on its own before you send it. This is true for Excel, this is true for PDFs, this is true for Word documents, and anything else, any type of PDF presentation, anything else. So if you attach an untagged PDF, the person cannot read it, and that one is on you. So the PDF presentations must be tagged. We did a course on how to make your PDFs accessible. If you still want to find it, I'm sure you still can in the NDA website. However, it is also important to know that any type of Excel documents, any type of Word documents must still be made accessible. They are sometimes understandable, but not accessible and not easy to read. It does cost a lot of time. It might take us twice the time, 4 times the time to understand what you're actually trying to get to us if the document is not accessible. And I know a lot of people that just download it, try to see if the document is accessible. If they can't understand it in the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes, they just give up and ask for either for an accessible copy or stop talking to the vendors. Next slide, please. Automated native accessibility checkers. An automated checker is something that runs while you create your email. It's basically running in the background. You do need to activate these features in an accessibility menu for every email platform. Every email platform has accessibility features on its settings. The checker is automated so that means it will not catch every issue. You need to be conscious of the materials that you're sending, especially if the email is meant to be sent en masse. So a big marketing email that has any and every big marketing email that has ever existed. So you need to make sure that your images are accessible. You need to make sure that your text is comprehensible. You need to make sure that your tables are good. There's no flashing, colors are good. You need to be using templates is an example for options that you have already. But you also need to remember to manually check those options from time to time and make sure that all the materials that you add there are accessible. For example, on Outlook, you can select Show Me Accessible Warnings while I work. So you need to make sure that all of that is running. Next slide, please. So you do have an accessibility checker on Outlook. You need to go to your settings. You need to go to General, Accessibility, and then you can find accessible content. You can ask the sender to send content that's accessible. Then you can save. That actually changed a lot of the ways of how I work, and it made things so much easier for me. It kind of made things a bit harder for people who are sending me an email through Outlook, but you know, accommodations for everyone. Next slide, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We have a question.
Yes.
If I use Gmail, what is the setting equivalent to show me accessibility warnings while I work?
Unfortunately, Gmail doesn't have an equivalent for it, which is why Outlook is what's usually used for accessibility emails, especially for marketing. Oh, everyone have a happy Disability Pride Month, and that would be the end of our presentation. If there are anything else, Kim?
Yes, so are there any questions before we keep rolling? We have a couple more slides, but we can, oh, okay, so we got a happy pride back. So just
Yay.
think about this question. So I will continue. So what we have done for every training that we have done is we have offered to everyone who has taken our training a free automated audit to learn if their website is at risk. So if your website is compliant, non-compliant, or semi-compliant. And then we will have a 30-minute session with Sitla Lee to really review what your issues are. I will also offer to you all that you certainly can have that session aside from the website, but if you do have some additional questions on the email, we can handle it during that time as well. But again, what you would need to do is just to send your website URL to Alfonso.dc@results1llc.com, and we will certainly provide that. And then there are additional trainings available through Results One. I think some of you who have been on here know that we have done creating accessible content twice, social media and accessibility, creating accessibility PDFs. And then we have some additional ones, introduction to assistive technology to disability inclusion, inclusive practices for conducting accessible virtual meetings. And then where we are today, creating accessible emails. And so with that, we will open it up to questions, and let me see what I have. Okay, the next question is, what about Apple email?
Apple email does have some options for accessibility, but it's mostly for the user. So you as the user can decide, I want larger text when I open my emails. So it does modify emails you get, but it doesn't really modify emails you send as much.
Okay. Any other questions? And certainly feel free to unmute. Any other questions? Okay, sometime could you demonstrate in a webinar how one would actually accomplish the various accessibility realms?
That would be a good idea for a workshop. We can work on it.
Okay, Stephanie, we can work on that as a new workshop. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I do want to take this time on behalf of Results One and Citlali Rioja to thank you all so very much.